Um, let's see. So let's talk about how you get started. So the first habit that we're going to talk about is assess before you assign. When you step in with a caregiver, don't assume that you know what's going on, and instead assume very little. Assume that that all of your preconceived notions about the interactions you had with the caregiver in the past are false. And all that you're trying to do is figure out on that scale, -1 to 1, where this caregiver actually is. Um, Also, I meant to put a slide on this. I'm using caregiver, parent, training, coaching, support, all interchangeably here, just for ease of vernacular. A lot of folks think that parent training is a little bit too restrictive. They call it caregiver support, caregiver coaching. I encourage you to call it whatever you would like. I don't really like to get into the linguistics of all this stuff, but just so you know, that's how I'm labeling it here. So, what does assess before you assign really mean? Well, it means don't assume you know priorities before you actually step into it. There's been many times in my clinical career when I've stepped in with a 3-year-old, and in my mind, this case is all about toleration training, and tolerating no, and then learning NET skills, or excuse me, learning play skills to be able to engage with the natural environment. Right. That in my mind, that is exactly what needs to happen. That's what I wrote the behavior plan on. That's what's on the behavior plan that the caregiver signed. And then I step into those first few meetings, and what do I see? Well, I talk to a parent. I'm all excited about my plan. I give them the 10 steps, and they're completely disengaged. They just say, okay, yeah, I'll try it. Okay, sounds good. And I'm like, what happened? I thought we were kind of had a flow here. Like, what's going on? Well, when you dive in deeper, they are so tired of diapers. Whether it's a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old. I have a 5, 4, and 1.5-year-old, and I am tired of diapers for my 1.5-year-old. So when I stepped in, assuming that I knew the priority, because that was what the behavior plan said, what it actually told the parent was, I'm coming in with my way or the highway, and there's actually not much you can do to modify it. And that's the opposite experience that we want a caregiver to have. In order for them to get set up and bought in and trusting, we need to give them something that's worth working towards. We need to say, here are the small steps that you need to take. Step 1, step 2, step 3. We'll talk about that in shaping in a second. This is why it's worthwhile to get there, right? This is the value aligned behavior quality of life thing that we're working on. So what I tell my supervisees, and when I work with folks, there's 3 questions that we really want to ask before selecting that first caregiver training topic. And neither of them have to do with what is listed first or in alphabetical order on the behavior plan. We want to know feasibility. If that caregiver wants to work on potty training, then we need to be real about what that is going to take. Are we doing it in session? Are we doing it outside of session? Is everyone doing it at the same time? And does that mean that we need a 24-hour sit schedule? Does that mean that we need to switch from diapers to underwear? Does that mean that the laundry machine is going to be cooking 24 hours a day? And can the caregiver keep up with that? Do we have enough underwear in the house for the kid to pee through 5 underwears a day? What is the reality of what you have bandwidth for, and can we handle that? And if not, how can we adjust it? How can we change what has to happen so that you can handle it, right? What about impact? Can we show progress in a short-term way? Let's take a teenager, and all the caregiver cares about is him having a full birthday party when he goes to invite people to his party, right? That caregiver wants to be able to invite 7 friends over and have a Fortnite themed birthday party in the backyard or something. Well, maybe our client is starting out with very little social skills, with very little friends, and we need a lot of prerequisite skills to get started. Well, the first goal that we want to start with is not have 7 kids at a birthday party in 6 months. that's far away. There's a lot of micro steps to get there, and it's not very visual. It's not, we can't see it happening in the meantime. And then finally, what is the readiness? Is this something that they actually want, or is this something that they've been told to want? This is kind of a tricky one, and you kind of have to play this caregiver by caregiver. But oftentimes, when you think about the journey of um, a caregiver who was just received notice that her kid was diagnosed with autism, there are going to be things that they wanted to happen that now are going to be significantly more challenging because of the new reality that they're in. And they may still be holding on to some of those things as wants and things that they really want to work towards. But every time they go to a pediatrician or a therapy, they're just pounded in. No, you only need to be worried about language. You only need to be worried about potty training. You only need to be worried about school acceptance, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to make sure that they're not just parroting back whatever the last therapist told them to worry about, right? And you can figure some of this out by reading previous behavior plans, looking at the initial assessment, and ultimately looking at them as they express this. Do they lean in? Do they get excited when they're talking about the goal? Are they able to say that when this happens, then XYZ will happen, then my day will change in this way that's measurably improvable? When it comes to feasibility, the main thing we want to look at is parental stress. Um, Parental stress is extremely relevant. It is modifiable if we had control over a number of different things. But for our cases, we're going to treat it as a pretty constant variable. And the reason I like to treat it constant is it's a lot easier to change the goal and take smaller shaping steps to our overarching goal than it is to de-stress a parent, right? So it's a lot easier to say, instead of doing potty training, we're going to be focusing on manding for the bathroom and staying dry for 10 minutes at a time. That's a lot easier than buying a new washing machine, getting an in-house nanny, and having that person do laundry 24 hours a day. Um, Notably, this change in the goal, right, the increase in stress, is not because they don't care, it's because they're at capacity, right? Most of the caregivers that I've worked with have multiple different kids, which means that they have a bunch of other things to plan on, not just the one that the client that you're working with. When it comes to readiness, whatever you think is best is ambivalence, not agreement. This is super common in parents who have been at this game for a while. I see this a lot with like teens. When I work with teens and I work with their caregivers, sometimes I see folks who are extremely passionate. They've taken control of the entire care plan for the last 15 years. They are just steering the vote. And then I sometimes see other caregivers who have hit that learned helplessness, right? They've gone through so many providers who have promised and said so many things, and nothing has really changed in a way that they care about. And so ultimately, they're going through the motions. They're heading to you. They're saying, "Yeah, whatever you think would be best," and then they're just passing on. Well, when you see that, and when you hear that from the caregiver, that is when your open-ended interviews come into play. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But we need to probe and learn. We need to ask questions. We need to ask them to clarify what they're saying. We need to show that we're listening a million times more than we're talking, and we're learning a lot more than we're doing. I'm seeing a couple folks in the chat saying that's what I'm experiencing now. Me too. The best thing that I can recommend for you is going to be that motivational interviewing, the deep dive into the why, the open-ended interview that we'll talk about in a couple sections. There's a reason why open-ended interviews take longer and often reveal more variables. It's because they do a better job of getting the entire environment on paper, right, in front of us so we can talk through it. One thing to focus on here is if you're hitting high ambivalence, whatever, I don't care. Switch tactics, right? Don't just beat the dead horse. So that means instead of talking about what you want to change in terms of the child, maybe you talk about what you want to change in your own life. Maybe what they really want is to be able to have a coffee date with their friends every Tuesday morning. And that means that they can't be having calls home from school to pick up their kid 3 times a week. Right. And so maybe by looking at the caregivers reinforcers, we can then reverse engineer where we want to start. All right, so 2 and 3 are related. We are building an alliance and using the motivational interview principle.